We're going to have a little talk about exteriors. I'd like to introduce Luis Batista. Me and Luis are technical trainers for the National Tile Contractors Association. We go all over the country and we give educational programs and workshops about correct standards and methods and how to install tile. We also have Dan Hecox. He's our state ambassador for the NTCA in Nebraska. But we're going to talk about installations on exteriors and particularly installations on floors on exteriors. You know, whenever we're installing outside, we have a lot of different things that we have to contend with. And if we use the same methods that we've had success with on an interior installation, it may not function as well because that exterior installation is exposed to a lot of different environmental things that the interior installation is not exposed to. So we have to think about that. Whenever we start a project, we always want to evaluate our surface and make sure it's right. And one of the things that we encourage everyone to do, all of our members or anyone who's installing tile, is to follow the industry guidelines. You know, we have guidelines set for how to do installation. You find those in the Tile Council of North America Handbook and American National Standards, ANSI book. One of the things it says about exterior installations is there's a section in each method that says preparation by other trades. So that's what the responsibility of the other people ahead of us, that's their responsibility. And one of the things that it says is we're supposed to have a slope in our slab, in our concrete. We need to check it. We actually need to have a 1/4 inch per foot slope, and that's to allow the water to run off. So that's what Luis is doing here. He's got a 6-foot level. So if we figured a 1/4 inch per foot and 6 foot, we would need to have 1.5 inches of slope. So once he raises that level up to the level line, he can measure it. How does it look in there, Luis? We actually built this to be perfect, so we knew ahead of time that that was going to happen. But that's one thing you want to check out. Make sure that you got the appropriate amount of slope so that water can get off there. You know, one of the most detrimental parts to an exterior installation is freeze thaw. You know, tile and grout is not waterproof. Water can go through grout, it can go through stone, and it can go through many tiles. And when it goes through there, a water molecule is one size when it's water, but when it freezes, it gets bigger, it expands, and that's what destroys these installations. If you look in the methods part of the TCA under the exterior installations, there's a limitation section, and it says in freeze-thaw areas, degradation can increase faster. So there's different parts of the country where we have this freeze-thaw cycle, and when I'm talking about that, what I'm basically talking about is when water can come in, let's say in the daytime, and it's above freezing, well, what happens at night? It cools down. That water is sitting on the surface, it freezes, it can get into crevices. Once it freezes, it expands, opens up those crevices, and works its way in. Another thing that we need to check is we got to make sure that it's flat. We got to make sure the surface is flat. There's actually standards for how flat a surface should be before we put tile on it. Basically 2 standards that I'll address. One of them is for the large format tile, and if you're not familiar with what a large format tile is, it's any tile that has one side that's 15 inches or more. The other category is for all the tiles that are smaller than that. And the standards for the large format tile is we can't have any deviation, and when I say deviation, I mean a hump or a dip of more than 1/8 of an inch in 10 foot. So that means most jobs that we're going to have some type of prep. On an exterior job, that is particularly important, and the reason being is if we have a dip, what's going to happen? When the water's running down, it's going to hit that little bit of a dip, it's going to stay there. Of course, it can create a slippery spot, but it also encourages the decline of the installation, the degradation of the installation, because that freeze thaw with that water setting in there soaks in, freezes, expands, and creates issues. Another thing we want to check is we want to check the concrete. Concrete guys all over the country are putting sealers on concrete nowadays, and the reason they do that is it slows down the curing time of the concrete, okay? So one way to check it is to put water on it. You can see Luis has done that. If that water beads up, like it would bead up on a newly waxed car, you know you've got an issue and there's some sealers on there, and you're going to have to remove those sealers. You could possibly use a primer, depending on the manufacturer of that primer, and that will be something you would want to do a test on, actually put the primer on it and do a bond test to see how well it works. So anyway, if it beads up, you can scarify it, you can bead blast it, you can shot blast it, you can mechanically open up that pore structure to allow that mortar to get a bite. If it soaks in, then you know you're good to go. But the other extreme to that is having a very, very porous substrate. If that water soaks in relatively quickly, let's say within 5 seconds or so, then you've got a really poor substrate. And because we're using products, cement, thin set, they're mixed with water, it can actually pull that moisture out of our thin set and weaken our thin set. So we need to be aware of those conditions of that concrete. If there's sealers, if it's very porous, this seems to be, it's soaking in pretty good. Seems to be pretty poor situation. I think we're good to go.
Temperature.
Another good thing that we want to think about, this is probably the most important tool in an exterior installation, or at least one of them. I was in Portland, Oregon about 2 weeks ago, and Portland's not known to be very sunny, but anyway, I was there and it was a sunny day and it was 80 degrees out, very nice. Well, most of the manufacturers of mortars and grout, they want you to use their products somewhere between 50 and 80 degrees. So I'm outside, it's 80 degrees, right? There's some concrete right there in the direct sun, and I think, what's the temperature of that concrete? So I had my thermometer, my laser thermometer, I shot it. On that 80 degree day in Portland, it was 120 degrees. The surface of that concrete was 120 degrees. So we have to think about that. Also, when we're spreading mortar in direct sunlight, that mortar can skin over really quickly. We have to be careful for that. It's always good to have tinning. We have to be careful about the breezes that blow across that mortar because it can make that mortar skin over quicker. So we need to think about making sure our temperatures are right to make sure that everything is functioning well. So there's a difference between ambient air temperature, the temperature that we fill, and the surface temperature that we're actually installing our tile on. All right, another thing we need to do is we need to inspect the slab for any cracks or control joints. I guess you guys have probably heard the old saying that concrete guys always give a promise. The promise is that concrete will do two things. It's going to get hard and it's going to crack. That's the two promises. And oftentimes they'll put a control joint in. They know that it's going to crack. So what do? They saw cut a control joint, and that controls where the cracking happens. They create a weak point, and when that concrete starts to move and wants to crack, it will crack in that control joint. So we have a control joint here, and we have to treat that control joint. Basically, when we have that, we've got two pieces of concrete, and those two pieces of concrete are moving independently of one another. So if we bridge that over, we just tile directly over it, it's going to telegraph through, and we're going to have a crack right through our tile. There's actually a section in our TCA handbook. It's called EJ 171, and it talks about expansion joints, and it talks about this process of how we handle these cracks and these expansion joints. In my opinion, it's the least used, most often misunderstood, and most important listing in the handbook, EJ 171. It's just a few pages in that big old TCA handbook. If you guys have one, you need to read it. So we've got this expansion joint, we need to treat it. We've got a couple of different options. We actually have a membrane over here. We can put over a crack isolation membrane, and there's a method for how to put this membrane down. The method is method F125 that you'll find in our TCA handbook. And what it says is we need to cover this crack 3 times the size of the tile width. Now we have a 12 by 24 tile, so we need to cover this crack 3 times that 12-inch side because we're running our tile in this direction. So we need a 3-foot piece cut, Luis, by 4 right over this crack, and we'll center it directly on there. What that's going to do is it's going to allow for some movement underneath there and not mess up the integrity of the tile on top. Also, when we're putting in expansion joints in EJ 171, it says that we need to honor this expansion joint. So if we don't use a crack isolation membrane, we have to carry that expansion joint up through the tile work. So a lot of the manufacturers of these crack isolation membranes, when we use them, they will allow you to move that joint over to the next grout joint, which can really help out in a pattern situation if you don't want to follow the control joint. Now, one thing Luis is doing here, we see we have a really poor substrate. He's basically given that substrate a little bit of a drink before he puts the mortar on it. That's going to allow the mortar to work correctly. hydrate correctly. Now when he spreads the mortar, he's going to use the flat side of his trowel. You know, we got a side that has teeth and we have a flat side. The flat side is for keying in or burning in that mortar. And you can see he's going to key in the mortar before he starts to smear. This particular membrane, you would want to use a 3/16" V-notch trowel. We always say follow the manufacturer's directions. These guys all around here, they test, retest, and test again their products. So if you follow their directions, 99% of the time you're going to have success. And the 1% of the time that you do have an issue, if you follow their directions, you're covered under their warranties. Oftentimes, we're fortunate enough to get to visit some of these plants and meet some of these chemists and talk to them. And inevitably, when we're having conversations with them, the question that we always ask is, we're going to talk to a lot of different people about tile installation. What do you want us to tell them? They always say the same exact thing. Follow my directions. So we always want to follow the manufacturer's directions. They've been tested to work. We want to make sure that we have success in our installation that way. Dan, go ahead and cut this. Do you have a tape measure? Has it been cut 3 foot wide?
4 foot.
It may be 3 foot. Yeah, cut it at 4.
I got the knife.
Yeah, you could lay it across there. All right, now another thing we want to think about is we have a 12 by 24 tile. Whenever we're doing exterior installations, it's really important that we get maximum coverage, okay? 95% coverage is what's required for an exterior installation, and that's kind of difficult to get. The way that we smear mortar is important, and it can help us out. Another thing we want to consider too is the products that we use. Those mortars and those grouts that you may have used in an interior installation, they may not be approved for an exterior installation. So we always want to make sure that the products that we're using, they're appropriate for exteriors. The reason we want to make sure and get that great coverage and use the right products, usually on exterior installations, the products that they have you use have more polymers and latex in them, and what that does is it slows down that water intrusion. We don't want water to get into our system, because that's where things start falling apart. When we talk about that freeze thaw and the water expanding. So usually the higher grade thin sets, the higher grade grouts are recommended for exterior installations. All right, another thing to think about, hand me one of these tiles, Luis. Whenever we're installing these tiles, these 12 by 24 tiles, and they're very popular, you guys probably see them installed all the time, we have to think about if we're going to lay it in a brick pattern, we want to stagger it the correct way. And you know, part of the process of manufacturing tiles is tiles are fired. And when they're fired, they can become bowed or warped. And that's just part of the process of manufacturing them. And there's actually standards for how much a tile can be warped, and those standards are found in ANSI 137.1. So basically what our handbook says is whenever we're laying a tile like this that has one side that's 18 inches or more, and we're going to stagger it in a brick pattern, we don't want to stagger it at a 50% offset. If we stagger it at a 50% offset, we're hitting the high point of one tile, meeting the low point of two adjacent tiles. So our handbook says we need to stagger it at 33% or less. All right. So Luis is going to start installing this 12 by 24 tile. Again, he's going to key in the mortar using the flat side of the trowel. A real important thing. Yes, ma'am. Good question. Yes, good question. There's differences between control joints and expansion joints. All that's in EJ 171. This product could go over either one of those. Okay? There's isolation joints, cold joints. Cold joints are basically when two different pours of concrete meet. Saw cut joints, of course, have been cut in order. They're also called control joints because they're controlling the cracking. But basically, all of those fall under the category of movement accommodation joints. And here's something you guys need to think about. Surface temperatures of tile in the United States can be 170 degrees. They can get that hot. When that tile heats up, tile isn't exactly dimensionally stable. If you heat up a tile, it can grow when it gets bigger. And then when it cools down, it reduces back to a smaller size. So with this expansion and contraction, think about a very hot day. We got 170 degree surface temperature. A cold front moves in, some rain comes. It hits that surface. We cool down dramatically, let's say 100 degrees in the matter of an hour or two. That's the importance of having these control joints to allow for that expansion and contraction. If we hard grout everything and we tile tightly to everything, once that happens, the assembly has no place to go. There's no place for that movement to happen, and the tile will lift off the surface. Have you guys ever seen this tinting behavior where tiles pop up like that? That's exactly what's happening. They don't have those movement accommodation joints in there. Good question. All right, so you can see Luis is troweling in one direction. This is a approved method for spreading mortar. And when we trowel in one direction like this, what he's doing is he's creating pathways for that air to escape, okay? He can collapse those ridges and allow that air to escape. Also, for a large format tile, it's recommended to back butter the tile. You remember 95% is our goal for coverage on an exterior installation. That's really hard to achieve if we don't back butter. So Luis is gonna back butter each tile before he puts it in, and when he installs that tile, he's gonna set it on that mortar and he's gonna move the tile perpendicular to those ridges. When he does that, when he moves that tile perpendicular to the ridges, he's gonna allow the air that's between those ridges to escape. It's gonna collapse the ridges, it's gonna help him get maximum coverage. Again, 95% coverage is what we need to have. One thing I'll recommend to everyone is, you know, we've got a wide variety of tiles to choose from today, more than we've ever had, and you can see that walking around. These tiles have different thicknesses, different types of backing, they have different amounts of warpage. If you've used one trowel and you've been successful with it and it worked on one job, it might not necessarily work on the next job, so we encourage everyone to check and see how your coverage is each tile that you lay, every job that you do, right out of the gate. You know, you don't want to set 3,000 square feet and then take up a tile and realize you got an issue. You need to know right out of the gate. Because of all these different types of tile, we need to check. So Luis has back buttered the tile. He's staggering it at a 33% offset. He's moving it back and forth, allowing that air to escape. Luis, why don't you take one of those up and let's see how we're doing on coverage. Let's look at this one right here. Hand me that margin if you don't mind. So right out of the gate, we want to see how we're doing. That's excellent coverage. 95% is what we're shooting for. We need to make sure that's fully supported. We don't want a lot of water to get in there. Like I said, the freeze thaw can be detrimental to it. A couple other things I want to talk to you about. How many NTCA members do we have in the audience? Raise your hand. All right. Guys, the National Tile Contractors Association, if you're a tile professional, we are your professional association. You really need to consider becoming a member. There's a lot of great benefits to being a member. I've been a member for many, many years, and I'm proud to be a member. Our booth is right over there. They can explain some of these benefits more thoroughly than I'm going to, but some of the things that happen when you become a member, your name will be on our website as a member of the NTCA. You will receive the Tile Council of North America handbook, which is, our guidelines for making sure that we have professional installations. You'll also receive the NTCA reference manual, which is a terrific resource, and it's set up in a problem, cause, cure method, which is really convenient when you're trying to figure out stuff. Also, we have great support from all of these manufacturers. If you become a member, it costs $500 to become a member. They will give you $2,000 worth of product. That means mortar, board, tile, tools. Guys, you literally can make money from being a member. If you become a member, you can also use the NTCA logo in your business. You can use it on your business cards, your invoicing, your letterhead. It's a great association. The number one reason I was a member was technical support. I don't know if you guys have seen a handbook from 2010, but when I do my workshops, oftentimes I'll show a handbook from 2010 and a handbook from 2017. That 2010 book is 1/4 inch thick. That 2017 book is almost 2 inches. I haven't measured it, but it's considerable. Things are changing. That technical support is something that was the number one reason that I was a member. I can remember many times using new materials and new ways and being a little bit concerned about and calling them, and it was just a wonderful resource to have. We're in an industry where one step can make you thousands of dollars and one misstep can cost you thousands of dollars, and it's great to have that support. Really easy to become a member. All you got to do is fill out a form. We got credit card swipers. We can make a member out of you real quick. All right, one last thing. What we put in here was a pre-made expansion joint. Went in real fast and easy, but you can also put in your own expansion joint. And this is according to EJ171. And in the diagram with EJ171, it shows this backer rod. Luis is going to install a little bit of backer rod here in a joint. And what that backer rod does is it basically allows our sealant to just stick to the two sides of the tile. It keeps the sealant from sticking to the bottom of the tile. What that does is it gives it added flexibility. We just got 2 points of contact. It also gives a concaved, convex shape to that joint, allowing that flexibility as well. Whenever we're using a sealant for an expansion joint, those guidelines that I talked about in EJ171, they're defined, a sealant is defined as 100% silicone, urethane, or polysulfide.
Back up a little. They can see the camera.
Okay. It's not the sanded grout caulk that you see. So whenever we're putting in an installation like this, we want to use 100% silicone. A lot of guys are a little bit scared of that because it can be messy. If you take a sponge and water and you hit this 100% silicone, you're going to have an absolute mess on your hands. It's not water soluble. But if you know the ways to use it, it's actually pretty easy. Luis has filled this joint with sealant. He has some soapy water there. He's going to spray that joint. He's got a float. He's basically going to cut that joint with the float, spray it again. There you go. Just that easy, that quick. So he has an expansion joint made in the field. You guys have been a great audience. Thanks for coming.